Welcome to 'Cause We're Nerds, the podcast that covers trends and new releases in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. You're listening to part 2 of 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, The Avengers. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, Caleb and I highly suggest you listen to that first before continuing on to part 2. Part 1 of this Avengers podcast can be found on any major podcasting sites. Stay nerdy. So I always thought this was kind of funny, right? Loki reveals his plan to the Black Widow, but in revealing his plan, his plan progresses and culminates to, well, what he wanted, right? So she gets the idea that it's all about the Hulk. He wants to release A, the Hulk, and B, kind of get them all to fight. And it's because of that they kind of all start fighting, right? And so you get Captain America coming in, and he has the Hydra weapons. And then Captain America and Iron Man, Tony Stark, start to argue. And again, great relationship. And one of the best lines in this movie, because Tony Stark is simply a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist without the suit.
And I actually had issues with that line in the movie, because in all the trailers, they played that as a funny line. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the movie, and it is like the most serious thing. And I just thought it was a little strange.
That's true.
Also, while they're arguing, Cap says, "You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play," which is foreshadowing of Tony flying through the portal at the end of the movie.
That's really good, Caleb. I actually didn't catch that foreshadowing. I thought that was a callback to the Captain America movie where he was the one that jumped on the grenade when nobody else wanted to. Great insight. We also get a line that calls back to the 2008 Incredible Hulk movie where Bruce Banner states that he tried to kill himself, that I believe he states, put a gun in his mouth and the other guy spit the bullet out, which is the same exact line that Norton states in the 2008 film.
So before we get too far into this, I want to try to break down Loki's plan at this point. Zach, what do you think he has been planning up until this point?
So up until this point, his entire plan has A, been to retrieve the Tesseract, B, after retrieving the Tesseract, to get the Iridium to establish a gateway so that he can release his army, C, after thinking through his plan, he decided he will need to disassemble the Avengers so that he can complete his control of the Earth, D, tries to get captured then while the Iridium is getting set, and he sets the stage for his great reveal in New York, and then E, getting rescued by Hawkeye and the agents, going back to New York after disassembling the Avengers, releasing the army, controlling the Earth, and winning at life. Does that sound about right?
I think so. My question has always been, like, what's his end goal at this point? And I think it is there, but you have to look for it. I think you're right. He came on the ship to defeat the Avengers. And I've kind of been wondering how he knew the Avengers even existed, because he'd never seen them before. The first time he sees them is in Germany, which is part of his plan. My assumption is that Clint Barton, Hawkeye, told him after he turned him to his side. And I think even in that deleted scene I mentioned, Clint might mention something like, Fury's got some guys that could make trouble for them. But without him actually knowing who they are, it seems a bit far-fetched to me that he'd go through all this trouble instead of just calling down his army to begin with.
And that's the answer I was just about to give you. But it brings up another good question. How did Hawkeye get a Quinjet?
You know, Zach, I have never ever thought about that.
Plot holes abound.
I don't think they're abound, but there are definitely questions here.
So the culmination of all the Avengers, Nick Fury and Maria Hill arguing, is that Bruce Banner is holding the staff, right? And Nick Fury's like, "Bruce, like step away, you're holding the staff, right?" And he looks down, he's like, "Oh yeah, I am." Everything bubbles to the top after that, right? Because Hawkeye's arrows explode. It throws everybody into disarray, both literally and physically. And then the Hulk starts to turn. I have a question for you, Caleb, in this list of questions that we've been throwing at each other. Bruce Banner turns into the Hulk. Natasha Romanoff is there, right? And she tries to settle him down. She can't. Now, the Hulk goes after Black Widow right away. Like, he is trying to kill her. However, later on in the movie, we see that the Hulk can control his powers somewhat. For example, when he changes in New York and then they have their Avengers assemble a moment, Captain America is giving orders and he's like, Hulk, go smash. And Hulk knows to go after the quote unquote bad guys instead of smashing his own team. So why is it that he can't necessarily control it and tries to kill Black Widow in this first instance, but in the second instance, he's able to recognize his own team?
You know, that's another question that the fan community had after this film. And the answer is there again, but it's not overt. It's Loki's control over him. The way I read this is the scepter has been slowly kind of poisoning his mind while he's been in there with it. That's part of the reason he was holding it in that moment. And so when he finally hulks out, it's kind of been in his mind. It's kind of controlled him. It's kind of aimed him towards the other Avengers. And that's why at the end of the film, after he's kind of shaken off the effects of that, he's back to normal and he can again aim it.
Now, it's here where Black Widow, as I just mentioned, literally almost dies. She is a second away from death by the Hulk, and Thor comes in and saves her. And this is a great battle between Hulk and Thor. I love the scene where he calls his hammer, and at the last second he swings and he hits Hulk, who like falls back to the airplane. I believe they showed that in a ton of trailers. It's iconic. It's amazing. It's great. And it's in this battle that I believe Hulk wins, kind of question mark. Now, obviously, they don't really finish this battle. They could come on, but it's obvious that at this point, the Hulk is winning against Thor.
Yeah, I think the way we see it end is more of a stalemate, but if it would have gone on, I mean, the Hulk is a giant green rage monster, right, as Tony calls out. And Thor, he gets tired. There's no way that he can keep up with that on a long-term basis. And I think that this fight is very exciting, and I think that it answers the need of the fans to see who's the best hero, right? Think about it. In a lot of these fights, we never see a clear-cut winner. It's kind of assumed that maybe one of them's a winner. But if Marvel shows one of their heroes lose, it can upset fans. And that's something that they do a lot in the films. They do it sometime in the comics, but there's usually more clear-cut winners in the comic books. And I wish there would have actually been a few more clear-cut winners here as well.
So with Hulk hulking out, he does look a little different than he did in 2008. What did you think about the similarities and the differences of Hulk now compared to what we got 4 years earlier?
Well, you know, I think that all the Botox and plastic surgery that he's gotten done really helps bring out their giant green rage monster. I mean, Doctor Strange just did a number on him.
Nice.
No, but for real, I like this design. I was reading some online, and some people said that they preferred the 2008 version of the Hulk, where he's completely ripped and always shredded. I don't mind that design. This one is way better, though. For starters, he looks like Mark Ruffalo. The previous one did not look like Edward Norton, and if you were going to turn into a giant monster, you would still retain some of the way you look, right? He's also very much more inspired by the comics. He looks more like a lumbering ape, if you will. He's got body mass, but he's also got fat. And the reason that's important is because while he's moving, we get the sense of how hard he's hitting and how fast he's going and all that action in the way that his body kind of shakes and moves. I also think that this one has more rage than that 2008 one. Looking back, the 2008 one only really got mad at the end, right? This one seems to, I mean, like I mentioned, he's got under the control of the scepter, but he seems to really go instantly with the rage and the attacking. And so for me, this one is pretty much far superior. What's your take?
You know, I'm still undecided, so I agree with a lot of what you had to say. I actually liked how the Incredible Hulk looked and that he was more defined versus less bulky. However, I also agree with you. The bulky fits the comic book version. I think it gives credence to how hard he hits. On the other hand, though, I don't like how he's smooth. In the Incredible Hulk, he was kind of more muscular, more veiny, and I felt like that showed his strength more. In this one, he's more smooth, and I don't know, it doesn't look fantastic. Now, I believe the latest iteration we've gotten the Hulk in Thor Ragnarok, spoilers, was definitely the best. And, you know, I don't know if I could necessarily rate one over the other. I think they just both look different. What I will say is that in this iteration of the Hulk, it doesn't seem like the angrier he gets, the stronger he gets, which was the truth in the Incredible Hulk in 2008 and in the comics.
That's true. And leading into that, what did you actually think about his CGI in this scene and in the rest of the movie?
You know, for the time, it's okay. It gets better as the Avengers movies progress. And this scene in particular, that hit when Thor swings his hammer and hits the Hulk, that seems very CGI-ish. But other than that, I thought it was pretty decent. What did you think?
Well, when it came out, it was obviously the most realistic Hulk we had ever seen, and it looked flawless. But I agree, going back this time, there's moments where I think the Hulk looks flawless. But I think overall, the CGI has started to date a bit. And it hadn't last time I watched this movie. And it's not just the Hulk. There's some other CGI in this film that didn't really hold up. There's a scene close to the beginning where they're in the SHIELD base where it shows an elevator shaft. And that looked extremely fake to me. And that's a shame because I worry about how this film will hold up in the future. But that said, it could be a lot worse.
That's true. And did you know that actually Lou Ferrigno makes an appearance?
Oh, you mean Lou Ferrigno?
What? How is it? Ferrigno?
Ferrigno.
Ferrigno.
No.
No. Ferrigno.
Ferrigno.
Ferrigno?
No.
Tell me what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, Lou Ferrigno.
So I was right.
Yes. Lou. Well, not the first time, but Lou Ferrigno.
Lou Ferrigno. Okay, I'm going to say. Now, Caleb, did you know that Lou Ferrigno makes an appearance in this movie?
If you mean his voice, then yes.
I do mean his voice. By appearance, I mean he actually doesn't show up at all, but you hear his voice. Yeah, so as I'm sure you know, Caleb, that the base for the Hulk scream is what Ferrigno screams when he transforms into the Hulk. They couldn't necessarily find a bass that they like to use, and so they just based it off of what he sounds like when he transformed into the Hulk back when, well, he played the Hulk.
Yeah, and the only line that the Hulk has later in the movie is also based on a line that Lou Ferrigno recorded for the film.
While that's happening, we also have Captain America and Iron Man trying to restore power and fix one of the turbines so that the helicarrier doesn't crash into land or into the ocean. Okay, this is a pretty cool scene, but again, for me, Captain America seems super weak, okay? Because we have two agents that come in to try to stop Captain America and Iron Man. Captain America easily takes care of two of them, but then we have one soldier who's basically destroying Captain America, and all he has is an assault gun. Captain America himself has an assault gun. They trade rounds, and then it's kind of like in limbo until Captain America, trips and almost dies. And so it's like, come on. I wish they would have made Captain America seem more powerful in this film because he is. He's a great tactician, but just in a lot of these scenes, he seems weak.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. My bigger issue with it is when he finally does pick up the gun, dude, sprays it. That's not how a guy that knows how to shoot a gun is going to shoot one. And maybe he's not used to automatics or they didn't have automatics back in World War II. I'm not exactly sure about that, but he would know how to shoot it better than that. So the whole point in Captain America and Tony being out there trying to fix this is to keep them from falling because one engine doesn't make them fall, but it makes them start to descend a little bit. If they lose another one, they will. And we see that on the bridge, Hawkeye comes in and fires an arrow with like the utmost precision into like this USB slot and shuts down a second engine, which puts the helicarrier into a free fall.
Now, I mean, it works really well in this scene, but why Hawkeye didn't just shoot 4 arrows before they actually boarded the helicarrier so that when they rescued Loki, they could trigger that and all 4 engines would blow up all at once? I'm not exactly sure.
That's a good plot hole that, once again, I did not think about.
So we get battles happening all around the helicarrier, and one significant one is Black Widow versus Hawkeye.
You say significant, and it is because it plays a big part, but it's actually not very long. And to me, this is one of the less exciting fights in the movie because we've had all these superpowers, and now it's just 2 regular people fighting. There are some really cool knife skills in this fight where Hawkeye takes out a knife and he's doing flips and stuff with it, and he's trying to take out Black Widow. But ultimately, all she does is slam his head against a pole, and he is no longer under the control of Loki.
It also shows that the Black Widow, for hand-to-hand combat, will beat Hawkeye. But then again, I guess you could argue against that because he was under control of Loki.
But it makes sense because, I mean, his weapon of choice is a bow, which means you are far away from your enemies.
So with everybody running off to different directions, after the Hulk decides to jump onto an aircraft and gets distracted, and now he's down somewhere, Thor sprints back to see if Loki is still in his cell. He gets back there, it looks like Loki's escaping, he tackles Loki, but gotcha, it's just a projection.
And this traps Thor in the Hulk cage. He's talking to Loki, trying to get him to stop, and ultimately he ends up falling down in the cage, basically through the air. While that's happening, and a little bit afterwards, Coulson comes in and confronts Loki, and he's got this awesome gun, which we find out is based on the Destroyer armor that came to Earth in that Thor movie. Because there's a tie-in comic that shows us S.H.I.E.L.D. kept the Destroyer. So it's in their possession. So they've been researching it, and they've made this gun, and they haven't fired it. Nobody knows what it does.
And it's actually called the Destroyer gun.
Yes, that's true. Unfortunately, there is a heartbreaking moment where Loki just appears behind Coulson and stabs him pretty much through the heart.
Caleb, you said heartbreaking. This was devastating the first time I saw this movie. Now, after Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., this just didn't carry any weight to me. I saw it, I'm like, okay, he's dead. But he's not dead. And so, yes, the first time I saw it, it worked. And a movie itself, it works. But I believe Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. just cheapens not only Coulson's story arc, but his ultimate death, which we find out isn't very ultimate.
I totally agree. The idea for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was to have Coulson come back and have these awesome spy stories. And maybe if they handled it differently in that show, it wouldn't cheapen this as much. But I don't think you've really watched it, so it clearly does. In that show, even his return is not very well explained. Basically, Fury had a magic machine thing that brings him back to life. And it doesn't pay off very well. And you're right. In this scene, it does cheapen it. And I also think I'm just not as attached to Coulson anymore. Because he's not in the movies anymore, you don't have that fondness. And I think this is something that's hard to convey when we're talking about it. But not even fans, just general audience members really, really liked Coulson. He was likable. He was in pretty much all of the movies. He always showed up. And he was the glue that connected all of these movies together. We didn't really talk about that in the films, but if it wasn't for him, none of these movies would really be connected by any elements until the Avengers came along. And so he played a really, really important role. And to see him cast aside and die, it's a great death is what it is. But we are obviously very sad at the loss of him.
And I will say that actually this is the best death in the Avengers movies to date. This isn't a spoiler, but in each Avenger movie so far, someone dies. And this is definitely the most heartbreaking death. I'm sure in Infinity War, once they kill off half the cast, that'll probably outdo this one, but we'll have to see. And so, Caleb, Fury has lost his one good eye.
Yeah, Loki ends up escaping, and the rest of the team that's there, that's not reeling in pain, is in the bridge, and Fury just lays it on thick and says, you know what, guys? You didn't do great. I guess this isn't going to work.
Now, he flings Coulson's bloody cards across the table, and I thought this was kind of interesting, because in doing so, we find out later from Maria Hill that the cards were in his locker, right? So Fury had to grab the cards, kind of spread Coulson's blood in it, as weird of an image as that is, and then give it to the Avengers to give them the motivational boost that they need. And I think this has the most significance to Captain America because Coulson's a fanboy. However, why I say I don't think this works is because out of all the Avengers, Captain America is probably the one that needs the least amount of motivation, right? He's a soldier. He's faced disappointment before. Look at his movie in Bucky Barnes. And he's just going to roll back from this. And he is the one that was stating while all the Avengers were arguing that Loki wants them to break up and that they should all stick together and just do what they're told. So it's kind of interesting that he is the hardest one that Fury's trying to motivate when he really doesn't need that motivation.
Well, you're right that he probably needs the least amount. But remember, he was also butting heads with Tony really, really bad. So I think that while this is used as a push to get them to work with him, it's also a push to get them to work together. Because maybe if they would have worked together, this wouldn't have happened to begin with. I'm not sure how that would have worked specifically. But it plays into a line that Coulson has as he's dying. He says, and he's talking to Fury, this was never going to work if they didn't have something to ... And what he's alluding to is something to avenge.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it does pay off in the end. And so it's here that we kind of see the heroes regroup before they go off to New York to do one final battle. So our first hero that we kind of mentioned, he jumped onto a plane, Hulk. He ended up landing, well, I don't actually think we know where he landed, and he's just in a rubble. And we get a cameo by Harry Dean Stanton.
Yes, the famous actor, right?
That is correct. Yeah, he's most famous for his appearance in the movie Alien. And it's here where he's like, son, you got a condition, right? And in an interview, Joss Whedon actually stated that he had this cameo, had Harry Dean Stanton in it because he wanted somebody to just accept Hulk for who he is. And apparently Joss Whedon was either watching Alien or watching some movie and was like, who else would be more accepting but Harry Dean Stanton? And so that's who we got.
And there's actually an extended version of this scene on the Blu-ray. We do find out where he landed. He landed in New Jersey, which is just across the way from New York. I have that right, don't I?
That is correct. Geography, okay. A+.
So he lands there, and they have a bit more dialogue. And when he finally does show up to the end fight, he's on this scooter, and he actually gets it from this character. The guy tells him, look, I'm stationed here, and I'm not going anywhere, so here, you can take my scooter. I mean, what a nice guy.
So nice. We also see Thor out in a field. The last we'd mentioned of him, Caleb said that he was falling in that trap created by the Hulk, and Thor at the last moment is able to kind of burst the glass and escape out into this field. And, in an iconic moment, raises his hammer, and he starts putting on his actual full suit of armor. Why did he never have this on before?
Look, it's way more comfortable to have your arms in the breeze and not be restricted by that metal. It's probably really heavy and very hot. But in all seriousness, I don't know. He didn't want to. But right before this is actually something that I also didn't notice before. When he tries to go over to the hammer and pick it up, I didn't really realize what he was doing. He was trying to call it back to him. And I think what this is alluding to is the fact that Thor was weakened by his battle. He was so weak that he couldn't even call the hammer back to him. He had to actually physically bend down and pick it up, which is something that we don't see again in movies, I don't think, and is kind of grazed by very quickly.
We also get a conversation between Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton.
And this jumps into some of their backstory / relationship type stuff, where she's basically helping him through coming back to the real world and not being controlled. And there's some lip service to the fact that she knows what it's like to have herself pulled out and somebody else's idea of her kind of stuffed into her persona. And it's kind of vague, but it works for this film. This scene is a little wonky, I think, though.
Yeah, again, they probably have the weakest relationship / interaction. What I do like about this scene is that it basically gives the audience an out of showing how both Natasha and Clint aren't as strong as any of these other superheroes, right? Because the others are superheroes. As Natasha states, monsters and magic and nothing we were ever trained for, which makes complete sense. And so in this New York battle, you'll see that, yeah, I mean, both Natasha and Clint do a ton of damage, but they don't do as well as the other 4 superheroes. Well, that's because they were agents. They're not necessarily superheroes.
And they're also kind of part of the team by chance, because it just happened to be Hawkeye who was taken over, and it just happened to be Black Widow who was sent to Banner to get him, who was around when everything went down. So if these were other characters around, maybe the team would look different.
Now, Captain America and I believe Iron Man find out where Loki is. And again, this plays to his motivation. Loki is set up now in New York because not only does he want to control the world and appease his father finally, he also wants a stage to do it. He wants people to know that he does it. Again, this motivation kind of works. It's a classic MCU motivation. But for all intents and purposes, they know where he is, and they now each suit up to head out.
So I have some issues with that, Zach. How does Tony know that? He says that Loki wants a stage to show that they're defeated on. I don't feel that is ever justified in anything Loki has done. The only time that you could argue that is what he was trying to do was in Germany. But his point in Germany was to get onto the helicarrier so he could unleash the Hulk. Once he's on the helicarrier, no one's really around to see what's going on. So I don't know how Tony suddenly gets this idea that Loki is trying to defeat them in public.
Great question. I think you can pose the same question of how did both Thor and Hulk know where to go? The answer to that question is that Iron Man and Bruce Banner, while they were in the room before the explosion happened, everybody stopped and the computer kind of dinged to show where the Tesseract and where the Iridium was, and it pinpointed New York City. That's how Hulk knew how to come back there, and it's also how Iron Man knew that Loki would be in New York.
But if you actually watch that scene, Bruce is the only one that sees that. Nobody else sees it.
Everybody sees it, Caleb. Shh.
But you're completely right. That is how Bruce knows where to show up at the end. However, I'm not sure that Thor should be there. How does he know? Again,
a lot of plot holes in this movie. I think they're minor, but they're still plot holes. He knows where to go, and he shows up.
Yeah, it's a lot of things that are glazed over that I think could have easily been addressed, but because you're going at such a breakneck speed, you don't notice it. The only reason I noticed any of this, if I'm being honest, is because I wrote down nearly everything that happens in this movie. My hand really hurt when I was done. I had over 5 pages of notes, and when you're following through that, you can kind of see these lines. But watching it, all this stuff is breezed over because it goes by really, really quickly.
And so after spending the last, 30 minutes on the helicarrier, we then transport ourselves into New York, where the last scenes will take place, and a great battle for probably the last 20 minutes of this movie. And Iron Man is the first one to fly into New York, beating everybody else back. And at this point, he is still in his Mark 6 armor.
Yeah, and it was damaged while he was trying to repair the engine for the helicarrier. So his entire point is to go back to Stark Tower and pick up a new suit that he can fight in.
As a side note, when he talks to Dr. Solvig, blasts the Tesseract and it kind of blows up, I actually love the shot of seeing that from a citizen's perspective, looking up at the Stark Tower, because you can assume this is a shot done a lot in comics where they take you into this kind of perspective of a just normal citizen, that you're just walking the streets of New York City, you look up and you just see that happening. You can imagine yourself in a world of superheroes.
And that's something that Marvel does really, really well in their films. It does give you that sense of scale and that grand sense of wonder that other companies and other studios don't do so well as in their movies.
You throwing shade there, Caleb? You throwing shade?
Yeah, I'm throwing a bit of shade there, DC. Yeah, I said it. What you gonna do about it?
Probably sue us. Classic.
Yeah. Is it classic?
No, it's not classic at all. I don't know why I said that. So Iron Man walks down, and as Caleb, you already mentioned, that device kind of takes off his armor, and it's here where he talks to Loki. And is this the first time that the Avengers are named, and does Iron Man name them?
Yes, this is the first time. We've been hearing about the Avengers Initiative since Iron Man. This is the first time in this movie, or in any movie, that a specific group of characters has been called the Avengers. Tony knows about the Avengers Initiative, so he says that they are the Avengers. So he officially names them for sure, because remember, the actual Avengers Initiative never happened. And he also says they're Earth's mightiest heroes, which is kind of the slogan of the Avengers in the comic books.
That's right. He also has a iconic saying that was shown in a ton of the trailers and marketing leading up to this movie, where Loki says, "We have an army," and he says, "We have a Hulk." So Loki throws Iron Man out of the building, going to kill him, and during that conversation, Iron Man has equipped these bracelets, which call his new armor Mark 7.
Yeah, these come down and use the bracelets as markers to know where he is. And it basically forms around his body. This is the next step from that gimbal that can attach and detach the suit while he's walking. This can just do it anywhere. And a quick note, Zach, those bracelets that he's wearing, those were actually a product tie-in. You can buy those bracelets, or you could at the time. They were like designer bracelets.
Oh, I didn't know that. I did see a Dr. Pepper truck getting blown up in the streets of New York City, but that was the only product placement. Now, not only are those bracelets an upgrade to the Mark 7, but if you pay close attention, another upgrade is that the Mark 7 adds a rear backpack stabilizer to his suit. What that means is that when Iron Man is kind of floating there, he doesn't have to put out his hands to stabilize himself. Instead, he has this backpack to do it. Now, unfortunately, that backpack actually kind of detaches later on in the film when he's doing his sacrifice, but he does have that for the majority of the fight.
Yeah, the entire point of those is so that he can free up his hands to fight. That was a deliberate design decision by Joss Whedon, because he didn't want his hands to be tied up while he's trying to fight, and there's so many aliens that it would be kind of unwieldy. So he wanted the new suit to have some bulk, and some different weaponry, which he has more weapons in his shoulders now, in different areas that he can use. Also to note, this armor actually goes back to that circular arc reactor versus the triangular one that we ended with in Iron Man 2.
This also leads into what I think is one of the coolest scenes in the movie, and again shown in the trailer, where the hole opens, the Chitauri are now invading Earth, and Iron Man sees that and tries to bottleneck the whole thing, so he flies up there. And, I mean, with so many people flooding through, he's really no match, but he's doing his best, and it just looks sweet.
Yeah, he's the first one to go in, and at this point, the only one. And I also just want to say, I've seen a lot of portals in movies and in video games. This is the best looking portal I have seen in anything. There's some portals in Thor 2. They don't even come close to this. This thing has like depth while also being a gateway to a different dimension. Not even Doctor Strange's portals, I think, come close to it. While all this is happening, we get basically the rest of the heroes show up. Black Widow and Hawkeye and Captain America come in on a Quinjet, and they are very quickly shot down by Loki, and so they start attacking the aliens on the ground. Thor comes in from pretty much nowhere. And for most of the next 10 minutes or so, this is the team we have fighting on the ground. Banner is still missing.
That's right. Now, Thor goes to take out Loki, and I just wanted to mention this fight for two reasons. The first is that, as you had mentioned, Caleb, Thor gets stabbed by that dagger. Again, I'm not exactly sure how that works. We've already seen Loki become bulletproof. The second is, it doesn't really make any sense. He gets stabbed by the dagger, but then Thor is like completely fine after that. The second thing I want to mention is this probably that scene has the worst line in the entire movie. Because Loki's there, Thor kind of lands on the building. I can't remember what he says, but he goes after Loki. And Tom Hiddleston shouts, "There is no stopping it. There is only war." And I wrote that down. I'm like, that is just a very awful line. And it doesn't sound like Loki at all.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Joss Whedon left that in, because one of the things he's great at is dialogue. So that's kind of strange.
And as this is happening, where is the Hulk? Well, as the team kind of all converges into one place, we've seen that this giant, flying Chitauri snake worm thing?
These are actually called the Leviathan.
Okay. I like it. I like what I called them better, but...
Well, in my notes, I called them the giant snake thing as well, and I had to look it up to find out what the real name was.
Joss Whedon, you can win this round, but to Caleb and I, it's a snake thingy, because we're nerds. So these Leviathan, one of them comes out, Tony Stark is trying to figure out what to do with it, kind of leads him back to the group of heroes, thinking that's probably his best bet, and it's here that Mark Ruffalo, again, makes an appearance as Bruce Banner.
Yeah, he kind of rolled in on that scooter I mentioned earlier, and in a shot that, no joke, gives me goosebumps every single time I watch it, with no fail. Although they weren't as bad this time. But every time, he transforms in slow motion, and this still looks amazing and beautiful. This is one of the best CGI shots in the movie. And he punches that Leviathan head on, and that thing just like crunches up and all of its armor starts falling off, and he gives Tony a chance to blow it up.
It is a beautiful scene. But something you didn't mention, Caleb, is that Bruce Banner states, "Why can I always control it? Because I'm always angry," and then he punches it. And I remember after this movie came out, there were so many funny memes and YouTube videos criticizing and making fun of this moment that, wait, he's always angry? Wouldn't that mean that he is always the Hulk?
You know, I actually didn't know that there was any backlash to this. Everybody that I talked to loved it, and it was a very commonly quoted thing at the time. But, yeah, that kind of is an issue, but maybe because he's always angry and he can control it, he can control when to let it out. Because clearly, he walks up to the Leviathan and times it perfectly for him to punch it in the face.
Maybe his heart rate monitor is just always set to 199.
Yes, which we didn't mention, but that thing is nowhere in this movie, and there's no idea of it.
So after he punches it, you get the team all circled up, and the camera kind of circles them, and this was shown in the trailer a lot, as a moment that the Avengers assemble. Now, Joss Whedon did this intentionally because he didn't want them to say an iconic phrase they say in the comics, Avengers assemble.
Yeah, and we actually still to this day have not heard that in any of the movies. In the comics, it's used as a battle cry. Captain America will call it out when they're going into battle to basically, boost morale and I guess give them a catchphrase. But following this scene, we get basically this big fight. And there's something I want to really give props to this movie for. And that is allowing all the characters to have their moments and use their powers specifically for them, but to fight together. One of the biggest complaints people have with the X-Men movies is that they're a team, but in every movie they're split up and they each have their own fight. Or there's one person fighting at a time and they kind of trade out. They're not fighting as a team like they do in the comics. And here, it is so tightly woven together, the action, that without one of them, the rest of it could not be done. There's this beautiful tracking shot that starts with Captain America and Iron Man and flies through the city and ends on Thor and the Hulk. That is just amazing and sells the scale and scope of it and how well they're working as a team.
And in that shot you talked about, Caleb, at the start of it, Iron Man flies in, shoots his repulsor rays at Captain America, who throws up his shield, and the beams bounce off and kill 3 Chitauri before Iron Man flies out. That's actually, I believe, a callback to the video game Ultimate Alliance. And in Ultimate Alliance, it's a superhero video game, and you choose a hero, and as you play with your friends, you can do these super abilities, and you can do super abilities together. Well, in that video game, Captain America and Iron Man's super ability is, you guessed it, Iron Man shoots his beams at Captain America's shield, and it bounces off and cuts down the Chitauri. Now, nobody's ever actually stated that they took it off Ultimate Alliance, but I still have my theory that one day Kevin Feige, the hairstylist, was playing Ultimate Alliance and was like, this would be really cool to see in the Avengers movie. Called up Joss Whedon, and it happened.
That's your exclusive. You heard it here, folks.
We also see a really cool team fight between Thor and Hulk as they're trying to take down one of these Leviathan. Hulk kind of tears off a piece of armor, sticks it into the Leviathan, and then Thor calls down lightning that shocks the whole Leviathan and crashes into a building, which we actually see that particular Leviathan again for a brief moment in Spider-Man Homecoming.
And we might actually see it again in Age of Ultron. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a different one at the beginning of that movie. But also around this time, we get Captain America acting as a commander. He's talking to some of the police and advising them on what to do, and they're not listening. And then it's really funny. He takes out a bunch of aliens, and they start listening. One of these police officers actually plays another character in the MCU. And I believe that this is the first instance of one actor playing 2 different characters at all, but also with their face and everything revealed. He plays a character in the Agent Carter TV show that aired for 2 seasons. He was one of the main characters, actually.
Oh, it doesn't count. I thought you meant one of the movies. Doesn't count.
Look, if you're going to say any of the shows are connected, it's definitely Agent Carter, because that show, it connects obviously with the title character. It talks a lot about the formation of S.H.I.E.L.D. It has to do, Arnim Zola is in it at one point. It talks about the origins of Black Widow in that program. It's actually very tightly connected to the MCU.
No, I agree with you, Caleb. That's awesome. And as you mentioned Captain America, I've criticized Captain America this whole podcast about not being super powerful. I think they retcon that in later movies and showing that he actually is very strong. Now, granted, no, he doesn't have the abilities that Thor or Hulk have. However, I still feel like he's shown as weaker than his superpowers are the levels they actually are in both the comics and in the movies, which, like I just mentioned, are retconned later on. However, in this scene, what works really well is his abilities at being a tactician and at being the leader of the Avengers. After they kind of all gather together, he starts commanding them and telling them where to go. And this is where Captain America shines in the comics, because he is a leader. He knows how to take down an enemy, and he tells the Avengers where to go. For you DC fans, he's kind of like Batman. No, he doesn't match the power levels of Superman, but he's a great tactician, knowing how to attack the enemy and where to attack the enemy. And that's Captain America. So where I think the movie failed at showing his superpowers, it succeeded in showing his smarts.
And that plays in directly to another scene in this gigantic fight where he breaks into this building and there's aliens in there that are going to basically kill a whole bunch of people that are in the bottom. And he breaks in and he stops it. And he takes out the aliens, and he ends up getting flung out of the building. But there's actually something nerdy I want to talk about in this scene. Throughout this entire movie, Captain America's costume changes.
Really?
Did you notice that, Zach?
No, I hated it so much that I just didn't even pay attention to it.
It's in subtle ways, and I mentioned that in that Art of book, there's a lot of different versions of a suit he could have worn. When he goes to put the suit on for, I think it's the first time, that shot where it follows behind him and the doors open and you see the suit in the case, the helmet in there is not the helmet he wears in this film. In that case, the helmet is all one piece from the top of the head, and it goes down to like his shoulders, and it's like a rubber piece, right? And it has holes cut out for his ears to actually stick out of the helmet, like in the comics. That's not the one he wears. The one he wears is actually this soft helmet underneath and this like hard helmet on top, right? Well, sometimes that's on, sometimes it's not. When that's not on, you get this soft helmet hanging off the back of his neck. You can see it in a lot of the scenes. Where did his hard helmet go? I don't know. You never see it when it's off, which is kind of strange the way this movie handles that. But in this fight scene, after his helmet gets taken off, he doesn't have the hard helmet, and he does not have the soft helmet attached to his costume either. It's just like a turtleneck.
I never caught that on any of my viewings or even this repeat viewing. So that's interesting that they included that.
Yeah, it's the first time I noticed that it was missing at the end, but I've always noticed in that first scene the helmet that is never worn in the film.
Now we also see Loki getting attacked, first by Thor, then Hawkeye, and finally the Hulk, who, after he has a little dialogue with him telling him that he is a god, the Hulk simply picks him up and ragdolls him around, which I still remember seeing this in the theaters, and that got the most laughs out of the audience the couple times I did watch this in the theater. And it is a great scene that gets a callback in Thor 3.
Yeah, the first few times I saw this, I actually missed the Hulk's only line in the film because everybody was laughing for so long.
Now, after we see the Avengers succeeding in battle, we get a couple clips of them simply getting overrun. There's just too many Chitauri, they're getting winded, they're using their powers, and it's becoming a lot. Now, during these scenes, we've also had some scenes with Nick Fury and the Council, and the Council's pretty much saying, all right, there's an alien hole in New York, it's time to nuke New York, and Nick Fury is like, well, given that it's a stupid A decision, I'm going to ignore it.
Yeah, I don't know where they think they have the authority to nuke New York, as you mentioned earlier, but they totally are for it. And in fact, they go above Fury's chain of command, and they order it themselves. Nick Fury is able to stop one of the jets, but a second jet flies off the helicarrier with a nuke.
Nick Fury is a smart guy, but I have always questioned his motives in taking down an airplane that has a nuke inside of it, in that he uses a rocket launcher to try to take that out. Is he want to get rid of his other eye and the entire helicarrier?
You know, my wife said the same thing, but I think that nuclear bombs have to be armed before they'll blow up, so they can actually be jostled around quite a bit without any explosions until they're armed. So I don't know if they would have been armed at that point or not. That's not my area of expertise. But it's a very valid argument you make. Now, during all of these scenes, we get some shots of Black Widow as she gets some help onto a Chitauri airship. And she flies up to the top of Stark Tower to figure out what's going on. And we find out from Eric Selvig, who had built this machine, that he built in a failsafe or a safety so that the machine could be shut down specifically with Loki's scepter. Now, we've talked about some plot holes in this movie, Zach. This isn't a plot hole so much as a deus ex machina. Like, it comes out of nowhere and it solves everybody's problems, and it has no build-up in the movie and no foreshadowing at all.
True, but I don't think it comes out of nowhere. I don't think it's stated in the movie. I can't remember, but it's clear that once Loki gains control, there's still that person inside of whatever is being controlled that can determine outcomes. For example, at the beginning of the movie, he controls Hawkeye, who whips out a gun and shoots Nick Fury. He shoots Nick Fury right in the chest where he knows Nick Fury has some armor. This is Hawkeye. He could have easily shot him in the one good eye he had, and that would have been the movie. Instead, he still retained control to shoot him just in the chest. So I don't think it comes necessarily out of left field because there is that scene. But you're right. It works. We move the plot forward.
Yeah, you're actually right. Selvig states something similar to that. And in a deleted scene, Hawkeye actually says more specifically that he kind of likes Fury, so he didn't want to kill him. But I think the worst part about this plot device is that Selvig uses the scepter to use it. And I just don't feel like Loki would give up the scepter to his R&D guy to do what with? I mean, as far as Loki knows, he doesn't need the scepter, and Loki pretty much always has it. So that's part of why I'm kind of questioning this.
You know, I don't think Dr. Selvig actually ever touched the staff. I think he was just messing around and constructing with the Tesseract, and it's because the staff is powered with power from the Tesseract, he is able to use that to offset whatever mechanism he put into place to protect it.
So it's about this time that she grabs the scepter and puts it in and tells the entire team that she can close it. And Tony tells everyone, wait, there's a nuke coming in because S.H.I.E.L.D. has called him and told him that, and that he's going to put it through the portal and not to close the portal yet. So he goes and he grabs the nuke and he basically pushes it up into the portal.
And it almost hit Stark Tower. I didn't necessarily remember how close it actually comes to just killing all the Avengers minus the Hulk.
Yeah, you're right. It is very, very close. But he makes it, and he goes through the portal into space. And this shot, this whole sequence where he's in space, is really cool to me. You see the ship of the Chitauri actually there, and it is enormous. And he flies in, and I guess his suit can't actually handle space. Maybe it's that icing problem from the first movie. But pretty much everything starts shutting down. We see the nuke end up flying into the Chitauri ship and blowing it up. And he's falling down when Cap says, you know what? We can't wait anymore. We have to shut the portal. And
it's right before this, too, that he tries to call Pepper Potts. And even though it's a minor scene, I thought that's so important just into their character development. I love that. And obviously she didn't answer the phone. But you're right. And so he's falling, and the Black Widow's like, all right. I mean, she knows what to do. She's an agent, so she closes it, and you see the portal closing. And I remember watching this the first time in the theater. I'm like, they're gonna kill Stark, and I can't remember the build up to this movie, but I feel like there were rumors that they were going to kill one of the Avengers.
I think it might have been a rumor at one point, but I also think they had already announced Iron Man 3 at this point. So we knew he wasn't going to die, but in the moment, you're not thinking about that. And yeah, I thought the exact same thing. He could die. Luckily, at the very last second, he makes it through, but the portal closes just in time for that explosion not to come through.
And this is when he's falling. Thor sees that he's falling. He's spinning his hammer, going to go fly off and save him. But it's the Hulk who jumps, right, and catches him in midair. And then as you see Captain America and the Hulk and Iron Man all on the ground, and the Hulk screams at Iron Man, and he's like, oh, right. And then in a typical Tony Stark fashion, he's like, I hope nobody kissed me. So I mean, it's a great kind of ending to that battle scene. After that, we get a news report, and where we actually see a couple interesting cameos that kind of recap the battle that happens in New York, and also shows us that citizens have, for the most part, been okay with the Avengers and are on board with Captain America or Iron Man or Thor or the Hulk.
And in this scene, we get our Stan Lee cameo, which, interestingly enough, this was not the original cameo he shot for this film. His original one was cut. It was actually one of those deleted scenes with Captain America where he's sitting outside at a diner, and he's talking to Steve is talking to that waitress that we see in this movie. And Stan looks over to him and he's like, ask her out, you moron. But that did end up getting cut, and he's here and he says, what, heroes in New York? That's ridiculous.
Which is still just a fantastic scene. Not only do we get Stan Lee's cameo, we actually get a cameo of an artist who, he's just an extra, so he actually doesn't matter. But it's in his art kind of quick gallery that he's selling on the streets of New York that we see that poster of Iron Man that says Iron Man that played off that a political poster that we actually saw in Iron Man 2. Do you remember that?
I do. He put it up where Pepper Potts did not want him to.
Another interesting cameo is that we see a senator who's talking and wants to control these Avengers. Now, Caleb, when I originally saw this, and even this time when I originally saw it, I'm like, oh, they're leading into the events of the Civil War. That's easy. That must be one of those senators. Actually, it's not. The senator who's talking is Senator Boynton, if I pronounce that right. And
I believe it's Boynton.
Boynton, okay, Boynton. And in the comics, Boynton actually is the senator who authorized Project Firepower. Firepower is basically a supervillain known as Jack Taggart, who pilots a suit just like Iron Man. And Firepower is a supervillain to Iron Man. He's just Iron Man's counterpart. Now, this doesn't necessarily play off. However, we will actually see Jack Taggart a year later in Iron Man 3.
Yeah, I thought that he was just a one-off dude, but that's good to know. So following this, we jump to the bridge of the helicarrier and what was supposed to be part of an extended scene, which is another thing that got cut. This was part of that Maria Hill scene at the very beginning that was going to make the whole movie a flashback. Basically, it was going to go to this point, and she was going to finish with the World Security Council. The wall opens up, and she's on the bridge, and then she walks down to Fury, and that's where the scene actually starts. But because they cut that, they also cut all of her disagreements with what Nick Fury has done. So in this movie, she only seems like a good soldier and a good employee. And then, so she's talking to Fury, and they basically have a dialogue about what all the fans were wondering, and what a lot of the media outlets were wondering as well. Once you bring all these heroes together, are they going to work separately or not? And once you make them separate, how are we going to bring them back together?
And I love Nick Fury's response because, again, as I stated previously, this is a callback to the comics. And I think it fits in really well with the MCU. They're individual, pre-established superheroes. They're in their own movies. They're in their own comics. And when the world needs them, they will answer. When there needs to be another movie with another villain, they can bring all of them together, right? In the comics, they each had their own separate comic, but then they also had the Avengers comic that brought them all together. So for me, this tied right back into the comics. This was a great explanation with Fury, and it wrapped everything up and put a nice bow on top of it.
And similarly to how in this movie, we were all wondering what the threat was that Nick Fury was gathering the Avengers for, this made everybody wonder what the threat in the next movie was going to be to gather them again. Unfortunately, playing into what I said about sequels ignoring problems from the last one, Avengers 2 doesn't deal with this at all because it starts with the Avengers already as a team again. So it breezes over that reason, which I think is a shame, and could have been handled a little bit better.
And in the last scene of the movie, not counting the end credit scenes, we get a glimpse of the Avengers Tower with Tony Stark and Pepper Potts doing their thing, and as it zooms out, there's only an A, leaving us the assumption that this will no longer be the Stark Tower, it will be the Avengers Tower. Now, after the end of the movie, we are graced with 2 end credit scenes, and I believe this kind of starts the trend of having a serious and legit credit scene for one of them and having kind of a more humorous credit scene for the other. Now, Caleb, for the first credit scene, how bad is this? Because we see a turd-looking smirk on his Teletubby purple Play-Doh face called Thanos.
You're not serious, right? This was great.
No, this looks so horrible now compared to what we've like seen, especially in the Infinity War trailer. Oh man, this was just bad.
All right, so I disagree that he looks bad. I will give you he looks different. What everybody assumed when this movie came out was that this was an entirely CGI creation, like he is in Guardians of the Galaxy and the upcoming movies. He's not, though. This was actually a character that they put in prosthetics. And it's a different actor than they used for anything else, which is why he looks so different. But I think this was a really great tease. Before he's actually revealed, the other is speaking to him. We find out that he's the guy at the top of those stairs, as we mentioned. And he says, the other says that the humans are more powerful than they were led to believe. And then he says, to challenge them is to court death. Now, for you comic fans out there, that line should have put you in overdrive. Thanos' biggest storyline in the comics is the Infinity Gauntlet storyline.
Mm-hmm.
In that storyline, Thanos is obsessed with death. Now, in the Marvel comics, we, like, in real life, we have these ideas of death and eternity and life. And these are concepts, right? These are things we use to describe phenomenon in our worlds. In the Marvel comic books, certain ideas like that, like eternity and death, are concepts, but they are also living beings. They're entities. They're alive. They represent the entirety of what they are. So like death represents death and sometimes presides over it, but it's also a person similar to eternity. And so he actually falls in love with the character of death. And his entire goal in that comic is to impress her so that they can fall in love and get married or whatever. And so this line is a callback to that, and a very great Easter egg for the fans.
I'm just glad that we don't get this version of Thanos in a later movie, because this version of Thanos, he would be flying in on his little helicopter with his little turd-looking smirk on his little Teletubby purple Play-Doh face, and it just, yeah. I'm happy.
I can't believe you, Zach.
The other end credit scene we get is just a humorous one where at the end of the movie, Tony Stark is asking the Hulk and Captain America if they've ever had shawarma. And, well, that's what we get. They're all in a restaurant that's been destroyed in the Shatari invasion, and they're all eating shawarma. Not saying anything, just exhausted and eating food.
Yeah, there's not a single line in this scene. And the shawarma line was actually improvised by Robert Downey Jr. and inspired them to make this scene. This scene was actually shot a day after the film premiered.
Really?
Yeah, so they had the red carpet premiere where everybody came out, and usually that's at least a week or two before the actual worldwide premiere, where it goes into all the theaters. And so they shot this the day after because everyone was there. You'll notice in the scene, Steve is kind of leaning on his arm and you can't really see his face. That's because he had a beard at this point. He grew a beard for the movie Snowpiercer that he was shooting. And they actually had to cover it with like this prosthetic stuff, but it still looks so terrible that they couldn't really show it straight on. So he covered it with his hand.
That's funny. I didn't know any. Well, I guess I didn't know that, Caleb. So, Caleb, we reviewed the movie. We've talked about the build-up to the movie, but how about the critical and commercial success of the Avengers?
So, Zach, as we know, this was released in May, the 4th of May in 2012. And this was a phenomenon. Box office-wise, it had a budget of $220 million. It made $1,518 million. That's almost a 700% return. And this movie, as you know, as everybody knows, was one of those event films, right? There's a movie that comes along it used to be a lifetime. Now it seems like it's every 10 years or so. That's an event film that everybody goes to, right? Avatar was one. everybody saw Avatar. Even if you didn't see movies, you saw Avatar. Avengers, I feel, was another one of those films. If you had never seen any of the other Marvel movies, it didn't matter. You went, you saw it with your friends, you saw it with your family. Everybody knew what you were talking about. And because it was so good, that brought even more people in to see this movie. And reception was great. Right now, it's sitting at a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 69 on Metacritic, which seems low to me, but I don't keep up with Metacritic, so I don't really know.
That's amazing that this movie just did so well. But as we've talked about it, I mean, it's a pretty flawless movie. Yeah, there's some plot holes, but it's just a fun and enjoyable movie all around.
And this was the first time anything like this had ever been done before. You had Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, 4 different individual franchises that you weave together to make one movie. And that had never been done on this scale or at all. And no, Kevin Smith's View Askew universe does not count. It's not the same thing.
So the Avengers obviously did great overseas as well as domestically and was received fairly well critically. Did it win any awards?
Zach, this movie won tons of awards. It won 21 different awards. Just among some of those were Best Special Effects, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Science Fiction Film. When it came out, it was the 3rd highest grossing film of all time. It was also the highest grossing film in 2012, highest grossing comic book adaptation, superhero film, or film ever released by Disney at the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it did very, very well. And it made its money back in only 12 days.
All right, we need to release a movie ASAP.
'Cause we're nerds. The movie.
On the Blu-ray of this movie, we do have a one-shot titled Item 47.
So this is kind of where they started using these one-shots as pilots for their TV shows, right? So the idea of this was to see how a S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show would work. And basically the plot of it is that there are these robbers and they're using Chitauri weapons that were left over from the battle to rob banks, which is an idea that carries over to Spider-Man Homecoming that we'll see several years later. Agent Sitwell stars in this, and I think he is just as good as Coulson. There's actually a little moment where someone accidentally calls him Coulson and apologizes for it, and they say they miss him.
He's okay. He's not as good as Coulson, but I mean, he tries.
I like him a lot, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the robbers get caught and they become their own S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. I was led to believe that they would be the main characters for the potential S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show. They're not. I wish they were, because they're great. One of them is Lizzie Kaplan. But it was the longest one-shot to date. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it was the first one for a pilot.
So Caleb, after talking about the movie, you had mentioned earlier that the Avengers did a great job in splitting time between all of them. If you Google how much screen time they each got, it breaks down for each hero that Hawkeye got about 12 minutes 44 seconds, Thor got about 25 minutes, Bruce Banner / the Hulk got about 28 minutes, the Black Widow got 33 minutes, and who gets the most screen time, Iron Man or Captain America?
Cap.
And you are correct. Iron Man gets 37 minutes and 1 second, and Captain America beats him by 41 seconds, clocking in at 37 minutes and 42 seconds. So it's pretty evenly split. Obviously, Hawkeye doesn't get a ton of time, which makes sense that you're going to give a ton of time to Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor. But I thought it was also interesting that Black Widow got the 3rd most time out of all of them.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising when you consider Joss Whedon, who loves female characters.
And Caleb, as we wrap up to the conclusion, what would you say is the legacy of the Avengers movie?
So this film did a whole bunch of stuff. For Marvel, Iron Man assured them the ability to try their grand experiment of a shared universe, right? But it wasn't until the Avengers came out, and it cemented them as a worldwide phenomenon. From here on out, all of their movies make a ton of money. Even their lowest grossing one from this point on, which is Ant-Man, is in the higher portion of their grossings for phase 1. I mean, this really brought them into prominence. This also kind of caused the comics to shift a little bit and start focusing more on the characters that were in the movies and pushing them into the forefront. I'm not sure if Hawkeye had this type of costume in the comics, aside from the Ultimate Universe at this point, but I know afterwards it was definitely brought over. It was heavily inspired by the film version. And also, there are a ton of other movie studios that tried to jump on board. Obviously, the biggest one that comes to mind is DC.
Fail.
They tried to launch one. They tried to launch one in 2011 with Green Lantern. It did not work. They rebooted with Man of Steel. It was a success, so they decided, you know what, we're going to fast track our own universe. The monster movie universe, which was supposed to start with Dracula Untold.
Failed.
And then supposed to start again with Tom Cruise's The Mummy, also failed. Transformers. Yeah, there'd been movies at that point, but because of
Sucks.
this, they were trying to roll this out to a whole bunch of other movies, and we're actually going to get the first spin-off either this year or next year in the Bumblebee movie. Also, the Godzilla King Kong movie universe.
That one's okay, actually.
that one actually is pretty good. But there's all these studios that are trying to replicate the success just because of what Marvel has done. If Marvel did not come out with the Avengers, or if it wasn't as much of a success as it was, none of these other studios would be able to do this. And that is incredible for an independent studio to come in 4 short years go from nothing to this mega blockbuster making machine.
And that's great insight, Caleb. And I know I was joking with you saying that these other studios have failed, but jokes aside, they have failed. If you looked at it, no other organization, no other company has been able to replicate the success, the world building that Marvel has been able to do. This year, 2018, we'll have the Infinity War. We'll also have Ant-Man and the Wasp. Does that bring the movie total to now 19 movies?
I think the Avengers Infinity War is like their 20th movie, and Ant-Man and the Wasp would bring it to 21.
Okay, so you're looking around an average of, 20 movies in 10 years. That's 2 movies a year. It's unheard of. It's unprecedented what they're doing. And the Marvel Avengers movie set that precedent, right? Because they were able to show that they can make these individual movies, and as you stated, Caleb, bring them all together to make a phenomenal movie. It is just amazing what they've been able to do. Props to Marvel, and super big props to Kevin Feige for everything that he's been doing. And so when we look at the Avengers in a whole, where does this line up in your ranking of the MCU movies to date?
Zach, we have talked a lot about this movie. This has been a very long podcast because there is so much stuffed into this movie that we have to talk about and break down. But I love this movie. This is one of my favorite Marvel movies. It is so well put together. It's the first one of its kind. I was worried coming back to it because I hadn't seen it in a while, and I had read some stuff that people said, the Avengers is kind of a plotless movie. And yeah, I guess you could say that. The plot itself is a little bit light. There is a ton of action in this movie. There's like 2 30-minute fight scenes between the helicarrier scene and the in New York invasion, which brings it close to 40 minutes or an hour just of action. So I totally get the complaint that the plot is light, but the character interactions are what drive this movie. All of the actors are phenomenal in their roles. Up until this point, they are the best they have ever been in their roles. Newcomer Mark Ruffalo is phenomenal. Kobe Smulders as Maria Hill is also a standout. If I actually had to pick a weak link, we haven't talked about it, I would say it's Samuel Jackson, unfortunately. For like the first half of the movie, I feel like his acting is a little bit stilted. But especially once you get past that, it is phenomenal itself. And yeah, we found some faults with this movie, but they're small faults. They're faults that you only realize if you stop and you look in detail. So this movie is one of my favorites. Last week at the end of the episode, my rankings were, starting with number 1, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, the First Avenger at number 3, 4 was The Incredible Hulk, and 5 was Iron Man 2. This movie is going to shift all of those down. I'm going to put Avengers at number 1, Iron Man at 2, Thor at 3, Captain America 4, Hulk at 5, and Iron Man 2 at 6. What about you, Zach?
So because we have been going through each of these movies and watching them and reviewing them on this podcast, I have to admit, Caleb, that this has been the most fun I've had watching the Avengers since the first time it came out in theaters. And I think I have to give a lot of that just to the backstory, just because I recently watched Iron Man and Iron Man 2, so I understand Tony Stark's character. I watched Captain America, so I get his storyline, Thor. Even the Incredible Hulk fits into all of this. And so I thought, this was just a fun time. I enjoyed all of it. Now, I can't only give credit to the fact that I've watched all the previous MCU movies to this date, but this movie in and of itself was great. I thought the best part was still Iron Man, was still Tony Stark's character and his relationship with Pepper Potts. Also, the relationship between Captain America and Iron Man was the best relationship. The transitions were phenomenal. The fight scenes were amazing. Now, some of them dragged, but for the most part, they were all just incredibly fun to watch. The storyline was okay. The character development for a lot of the characters was really good. As I just mentioned, Captain America and Iron Man. For some of the characters, it wasn't so great. I don't think it really paid off for the Black Widow or Hawkeye. You talked about Nick Fury. I would have to agree with you there that Nick Fury's character development wasn't the best. I actually hated what they did with Loki. I understand him more after watching all these MCU movies, but I still don't think it really lived up to much. And Tom Hiddleston luckily redeems himself, in my point of view, in the next couple movies. But this is just a fun movie. It's a fantastic movie. Joss Whedon did a phenomenal job bringing all these different superheroes and all these different actors together under one roof to make an incredible experience for the viewer. So last week, I stated that my movies in order were Iron Man is number 1, Captain America is number 2, Thor is number 3, Iron Man 2 is number 4, and rounding it off, Incredible Hulk is number 5. Just as you stated, Caleb, I have to agree. The Avengers movie crushes all these other movies. So my number 1 spot is now The Avengers, which means that behind in second place is Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and then rounding out the bottom is Iron Man 2, and finally, The Incredible Hulk. So Caleb, you know what I haven't done this podcast yet?
What's that?
I have not used my one good eye. So, you know who I have my eye on, Caleb?
Are you ever going to stop with that?
No, I'm now going to use this in each podcast, I told you, because I have my eye on Taylor Poole.
Please check out Taylor Poole. Taylor wrote the intro for our podcast, and he does just great work, and he is a really, really good guy.
Phenomenal.
You can check him out at taylorpoolemusic.com. That's TaylorPoole music.com.
Thanks for listening to 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, The Avengers. We would love to hear your comments and feedback at cuzwerenerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or any other major social networks or podcasting sites. Join us next week as we discuss Iron Man 3. As Robert Downey Jr. reprises his role as Iron Man for the 4th time, how does this movie keep that character fresh? How does this movie compare to Iron Man 1 and 2? And why did Jon Favreau not return for the 3rd installment? Find out these questions and much more on 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War. Stay nerdy.
say Thanos and continue.
Thanos. Than? Is it Than? Like
Thanos.
Than. Like a fan.
Yes.
Thanos. Thanos. Why is this so hard? Thanos. Okay.